We're going to continue on now and talk a little bit about the equipment underneath the cabinet here, which is a rack of limiter, reverb, power strip. There's the DVD and VCR, tape deck, CD recorder, and the telephone interface. So we're going to move down to this first rack and talk a little bit about the items that are in it. We'll go down top to bottom and take special time and talk about the reverb unit and the compressor limiter, since those are two items that you may want to get in and be able to adjust depending on who is here. The VCR is pretty much straight ahead VCR, and the telephone interface I'll learn as we go along here. We've got it hooked up, so we're going to see how that works. So first of all, at the top of the rack is the power strip. Of course, that feeds power to all the items in here, so you want to make sure that that's on. Actually above that is a system on-off, which uses a key. So that gives you a little bit of security, but it's not just for security. It actually does a series of relays. So the system turns on and turns off in a certain sequence. If everything turned on at the same time, the amplifiers come on pretty quick and the mixer comes on and pops. So you'd get a pretty good transit response through the speakers every time, and whether or not it really is damaging, it sure sounds bad. It sounds like they're going to jump right out of the cabinets. So what the sequencer allows you to do just by turning the key is it'll turn on the mixing board, it'll turn on all the processing gear here, and the processing gear in the back AV room, which is the DSP, the crossover and the limiter processor, so that by the time the amplifiers are powered up, all of the other items have stabilized and there's no longer any big spikes going to be happening. In the reverse, when you turn the system off, it turns the amps off first, so that as all these components start shutting down in order, you're not hearing pop as the mixer goes off and pop as the crossovers and limiters go off. So again, it helps the speakers have a less eventful life, a turn on and turn off. Power strip comes on in sequence. That turns on all the items in this rack. It's good to use a power strip that has a circuit breaker on it, just in case you have a problem with any of the devices here. You've got a local breaker to check. And your indication that the breaker had tripped would be, of course, you turn this on and off and the light doesn't come on, so that this has either been unplugged or something's happened elsewhere in the sequence. But you should also just double check the circuit breaker may have been tripped. This is feeding mostly just the equipment in this rack, but you never know, somebody may have plugged something into it during an event, and whatever, just make sure the plugs are in and secure. The next item down is the reverb, and we're going to take a few minutes talking about this. This has some presets built in it that you need to just go through and listen to the type of effects that you want. I usually find it's effective to have a reverb setting and an echo setting for fast and slow tempo songs. You might want to have a flanger for a special effect, and chorus is nice for vocal or acoustic guitar, to be able to know at least 5 or 6 different types of effects that you might want to use on different tempo songs or different rhythms songs. You don't want the effect to overshadow the song or the singing, so it really is just something to sweeten up and add that sort of produced sound to something, rather than just a dry, flat sound that wouldn't have any reverb in it. The room itself has some natural reverb, so you know, if you don't use it, that's probably okay too. It is nice to be able to send a little bit of that effect back into the monitors, so the singers or the people on stage actually get to enjoy that too. It sometimes frees them up a little bit, and you know, we don't like to let them know that we know that sometimes reverb covers a lot of intonation problems and stuff like that, but you can all help out a little bit sometimes by putting some reverb on it to cover it. So as you go through here, the knobs are an input level control, which will find a nominal level on here and dot it so that typically 12 o'clock is what I like to go for because it's easy to remember on my input levels, so we'll say 12 there. The mix balance lets you adjust how much of the dry signal versus the wet signal is actually going to be coming out of the system. Now, in the situation we have here, where we're going out of a board and back into a board, and the board is actually mixing the wet and the dry, we want to send out of this unit just reverb. We don't want any dry signal going out, or we just are doing gain combining again. We don't need any more dry signal. We can do that up at the board. We're only using the reverb to generate reverb. If you were using this in a small home recording studio or someplace where you didn't have a larger board with an effects send and an effects return, you could just plug a guitar or a keyboard in here and then adjust the amount of dry versus wet with this control. But for what we're using it for, we're going to go all the way to the right, which is wet. And then the LED readout is just, it shows us what preset we're in. And it is a preset range. It's got labeled on here, reverbs are 1 through 20, stereo reverbs 21 through 40, gates, delays, and effects and that sort of thing. So if you read here that the program you may want is up in the 70s, you're going to scroll up with the scroll buttons and get to that area. So let's say I want a reverb 8. Okay, and I don't know exactly what reverb 8 sounds like, but you can go through, figure out what you like, make a list of it, and then just be able to go to that reverb and effect that you want to use. And there's something to keep in mind here is that when you're scrolling, you probably don't want to have the reverb actually turned on up there, because you're going to be going through the different effects that it will put out, including that real low, like a third octave below an octave kind of devil sound. So you probably don't want to use that too much. So you're going to go to the effect that you want, and then back up at the board, the return level and the send level will come up with some preset points on that, where is a good place to start, so it's not overpowering. You can go to that and then tweak it as you want to go along. Those are the presets. You have some control over variations to those presets. So if you, let's say you want to go to a delay setting, which is up in the 50s, 51 to 60, I'm going the wrong way. We'll go up into the 50s. I could have picked something lower, gotten there faster. All right, so let's say I've got that setting, and I am playing a tape right now, so let me turn that on. I'm playing a CD. I am playing a CD.
Now, 1 or 200 people.
Okay, this is KP in the Grand Canyon.
No, that is another story.
So that's a preset. I'll go to a different preset now.
Mission stations that are now becoming churches also in a short.
So I'm changing,
Well,
and I just have the lav mic on, so you may not be able to hear that.
I would say hallelujah. You know what? I'm like.
So I can get big cavern, small cavern, more echo. But now I can change the amount of delay by using these adjustment knobs.
Oh, by the way, I don't want to forget to thank you.
So the amount of delay,
our senior pastor from Bengal.
this actually probably is the time of the delay. The decay is the sustain, and the level would be how loud that echo actually is. So I can turn that up, or I can turn it down. Decay. That's kind of an infinite decay setting.
And the churches he planted, he was supervising 24
So that's it, easy.
in the southern part of
So the best thing to do is find 5 or 6, like I said, that you like, and then you can get creative on your own time, but you'll have a couple that are nice just to be able to add on the vocals. Next down is a compressor limiter, and this is used as it's set up right now as an insert on a couple channels, using it on KP's mic for the teaching mic, and also on one of the wireless. Now, since those are on inserts, those can be moved from where they're at to another insert on another channel. So sometimes I find it useful to put or need a limiter on an electric guitar or a keyboard, or just if you get something that just seems like, man, they come on pretty loud sometimes, that you're always having to fly to catch the level, then if you put the limiter on it, it'll catch the peaks. You can make the fine tuning, but it helps keep people from being too terribly surprised by the initial strike of the string or the keys. I'll go through a channel here. Both channels are the same, so channel 1 and channel 2 are operated the same. The function of the expander gate, which is the first section here, a gate allows you to actually close the microphone or turn it off. That it gates that signal, so you're shutting off the signal. The higher you turn up the gate, the more signal it's going to take to open it. So if I turn this up really high, I could get it almost so that you could whack the snare drum and it would open just when you hit the snare drum. For what we're using this for, we're not using the gates on the teaching mic or the other wireless mics. But as I said earlier, that could be used if you had a noisy background environment. You could use it to gate open mic, so you didn't get all that air conditioning or street repair work or whatever is going on that you don't really want on your recordings, so that just the teaching would open it up, and then you can compensate for the completely dead gated sound by using the reverb to create a synthesized room in the background. Not the Grand Canyon like I was doing a minute ago, but just a little bit of a reverb, so you sound like you're in a room instead of a closet full of clothes. So the threshold is how hard do I have to drive that microphone, how high a level before I open the gate, and then this is going to be how fast it closes after I get done. So that's the release of the gate. So you can set it fast, it'll close and cut out that background noise example, or you can have it a little bit slower. So once it's open, it stays open and then gradually closes. That's that section. The sidechain enable, the contour switches are going to shape the way that the compressor sounds. It adds a little bit of an EQ curve to this when it kicks in. So it's not exactly doing bandpass limiting, which some more expensive limiter compressors do, but it is, in fact, contour is shaping the signal as it gets compressed a little bit, and it's probably emphasizing mostly the vocal range, adding a little bit of presence. Sidechain enable. Okay, I'll spend a second on sidechain because you're not set up to use it this way, but it's something we might want to consider. Sidechain allows you to insert an equalizer in line with the compressor. That equalizer then you can set at a particular frequency. If you've got somebody that has a sibilance or a problem at a certain frequency, whatever, be it their voice or their microphone, but if there's some frequency that just seems to be pervasive, you just can't get rid of enough of that frequency, you can insert an equalizer, a graphic or a parametric, in that sidechain and actually boost that frequency. So now the compressor limiter is going to be more sensitive at that frequency. As soon as it detects that frequency, it's going to notch it out. Now, it's not going to notch out much of anything else. It's going to basically go for that frequency. It will compress the rest of the signal to some extent, but it's really going to get that frequency. So that's handy to be able to correct some problems without having to squash the whole signal every time a P is popped or there's an S sound or some sort of a squeak that's just something you want to get rid of. So that may be something we'll talk about using here, or now you know what it is if you watch the tape and you read the book, because it'll tell you how to hook it up. On the compressor section, you've got a threshold, and just as the gate, this is when the compressor limiter is going to kick in. If you have this on 0, we're going on a reference to 0 dB scale, just how many volts is coming into the system before it actually does anything. So at 0, and the board's at 0, typically this is acting as a straight wire in that the board's going to have to go over 0 before this kicks in. So not normally would you want to boost this. Then you're making up gain that the board's not supplying. So look backwards and see if there's a problem with your gain structure of what you're actually putting out. Now we're talking about inserting through a channel. So remember, this is coming out of the channel after the gain control and then feeding signal back into the rest of the channel. So you probably are going to want to cut this slightly so that when you drive the channel, it's going to activate the compressor and actually do a little bit of action here to cut off the peaks. So this is going to determine when the compressor kicks in. The ratio determines how much gets compressed, or what the ratio is, 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, or you'll be able to hear it at the higher settings. You'll be able to see it and hear it on the meters here, and I think a good goal is to go for 3, maybe 4 lights at the maximum. If you go much above here, you're going to start really hearing that compressor as an effect, and it's really going to be audible that, man, something's getting squished. You can set it in such a way that it even turns the PA down lower than actually you could hear the person speak live. So you don't want to create that effect. You want to maintain a consistent level coming out of the system, and you're just compensating for a talker getting excited or talking loud, coughing, a microphone getting dropped, somebody unplugging their guitar that would cause a big pop. But you don't want to squish the dynamic range completely, because it still is live, and the speaker system is capable of quite a wide dynamic range. So you don't want it to sound completely squished. So you're probably going to want to keep your ratio in this area here, probably under 2 to 1, but somewhere in there. Again, you'll be able to see that you're just kicking on a couple of lights, maybe 2, 3, and this isn't going to be up too high. DBX has a couple of buttons here that do some management for you as far as the ratio settings. These still are in effect, but OverEasy does some calculations based on the input. It does some settings with the ratio amounts that are flexible. It slides depending on what the input is. And on the output area here, auto does a sense of the type of material, whether it's snare drum or speaking, and it sets the attack and release time according to, you know, the best possible guess for the little processor in here. You can do manual attack and release, in which case you probably want to have a pretty quick attack, and typically you're just going to have a pretty fast release. You're using it essentially as a peak limiter and just trying to maintain coughs or other problems, not really trying to compress things down to be ready for broadcast per se. So I would say just leave it on automatic. That seems to work pretty good. Output gain, again, since we're in a loop, we're coming out of a board, we're going back in the board through an insert channel. We probably don't want to add a lot of gain here, and leaving it at 0 is probably the best way to go. If this were being used in line on the output of a mixer, it could be used also a little more effectively as a line driver if you had to then send the output of this to an amp rack 200 feet away. This has a fairly good amp in it that you could use to drive that long distance, but as we're inserted here, I would say 0 here, and don't do too crazy on the threshold level here. Peak stop is